At the center of the greatest city the ancient world had yet built, there rose a mountain of brick, 7 great stages of it, climbing into the haze above the Euphrates. At the very top sat a single room, empty but for a bed and a table of gold, kept ready so that a god could come down in the night and sleep above his people. We remember it as a fable, the Tower of Babel, a story about pride and about why the world broke into 1,000 tongues. But it was real. They called their home the Gate of the Gods. We call it Babylon.
I'm Arthur, and the staircase to heaven was no myth, and I want to show you what waited at the top.
Babylon rose on the flat plain of southern Iraq, on the lower Euphrates, about 50 miles south of where Baghdad stands today, and it rose with almost nothing to build from. This was a land without stone and nearly without timber. A city here could not be carved out of a cliff the way Petra was, or raised in marble the way Rome would be. It had to be made from the one thing the river left behind without end: mud. Millions of bricks of river clay, shaped by hand, dried in the sun, and, for the parts that mattered most, baked hard in great kilns. Babylon is the proof of what a people can raise out of nothing but earth and water, when they decide the work is worth it. In 626 BC, a governor named Nabopolassar threw off the Assyrian Empire that had ruled Mesopotamia for centuries and made Babylon the capital of a kingdom of its own. Within a single generation, under his son, it grew into the largest city the world had yet seen. Its population, by most estimates, somewhere between 150 and 200,000, when most cities anywhere were a fraction of that size. The Euphrates ran straight through the middle of it, splitting it into 2 halves, joined by a single bridge of brick. And a people who owned little but mud decided to use that mud to build the most ambitious tower their world had ever seen. Not for defense, not for trade. They built it to bring the sky down to the earth. What that mud became, 3 continents would one day travel to see.
The son was Nebuchadnezzar II, and he ruled for more than 40 years, from 605 to 562 BC.
He left thousands of inscriptions behind him, and the striking thing is what they boast about. Not battles won, not enemies crushed. Brick. Temples raised, walls thickened, streets paved. He measured his greatness in construction. And he refused to leave his city the dull brown of dried earth. Babylon's craftsmen had learned to do something no one else did so well: to glaze brick in a deep cobalt blue, the color of lapis lazuli. A stone so prized, it was hauled by caravan all the way from the mountains of Afghanistan. They could never have sheathed a city in real lapis, so they imitated it, in fired clay, by the acre. From a distance, in the hard light of the plain, Babylon did not look like a city of mud. It looked like a city dressed in jewels. The bricks were set in bitumen, the black natural tar that seeped from the ground here, so the building sites carried a sharp smell of asphalt and hot clay. The showpiece was a gate. The Ishtar Gate, finished around 575 BC, rose more than 40 feet high, faced entirely in that blue glaze, and across it marched rows of animals modeled in relief: bulls, lions, and a strange long-necked dragon called the Mushushu, the sacred beasts of the gods Adad, Ishtar, and Marduk. Beyond the gate ran the processional way, a paved avenue more than half a mile long, walled on both sides to the height of a 5-story building, and along those walls more than 100 glazed lions stalked in single file. It was a road built for one day a year, the day the gods themselves would travel it. Around it all ran the walls, double walls, and so thick, the German archaeologists who excavated here estimated that 2 chariots could have passed each other along the top. The Babylonians named them the way you would name a protector, Imgur Enlil. The god Enlil has shown favor. Behind them, the city believed itself untouchable. And yet all of this, the Blue Gate, the Avenue of Lions, the walls that could not be broken, was only the entrance hall. Every line of it pointed inward, toward one thing at the dead center of the city that made all the rest look small.
That one thing was a ziggurat. And to picture a ziggurat, set aside the idea of a temple as a hollow hall you step inside.
A ziggurat was solid, an artificial mountain of brick built up in shrinking stages with staircases running up its outside and a small shrine at the very top. The reasoning behind it was simple and a little breathtaking. If the gods lived high above the world, then raise a height for them and they would come down to it. Babylon's mountain had a name, Etemenanki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. It belonged to Marduk, the city's own god. A surviving Babylonian tablet records its plan, a square base about 90 meters along each side, climbing to a height of roughly 90 meters as well, as tall as a 30-story building, made of mud. 7 stages, one stepped above the next, which some think stood for the 7 moving lights the Babylonians could pick out in the sky. Even if that figure was the ideal on a scribe's tablet, rather than the brick that truly rose, it was still a giant, the tallest thing ever raised on the Mesopotamian plain. And it swallowed an almost unimaginable amount of work. Millions of bricks, a sun-dried core faced with the harder, kiln-fired kind, the only way a mountain of earth could hope to carry its own weight. A mountain made not by the slow grinding of the earth, but by the hands of tens of thousands of men, carrying baskets of clay up wooden ramps in the heat. And it was, in its way, already a resurrection. Less than a century before, the Assyrians had razed Babylon almost to the waterline and toppled the old tower with it. And raising Etemenanki again, stage by stage, became the proudest act of the new dynasty, the city insisting in brick that it could not be killed. This is almost certainly the Tower of Babel. The Hebrew scripture that describes a tower with its top in the heavens, built on a plain in the land of Shinar, was set down by people who had reason to know it, because, as you will hear, thousands of them were brought to this very city and saw the thing standing with their own eyes. The story did not invent the tower. The tower gave rise to the story. And what waited at the top? The Greek traveler Herodotus, writing a century later, was told there was no statue at the summit, only a richly draped couch and a table of gold, kept ready for the god who came down in the night to sleep above his city. He never climbed it himself, and he may well have exaggerated in the telling, but the idea is pure Babylon. A people who built a tower of earth taller than anything around them and crowned it with an empty bed and waited for heaven to come and lie down in it. The city's own name said as much, Bab Elim, the gate of the gods. Babylon did not think of itself as a place near to the gods. It thought of itself as the hinge where heaven and earth were joined, and the tower was that hinge made visible. And once a year, the gate swung open.
While the tower reached up for the sky, the men in its shadow were busy reading it.
On the rooftops of Babylon, priests watched the heavens night after night and wrote down what they saw, the moon, the planets, even the price of barley, in a running record that began at least as early as 652 BC and ran on for centuries, one of the longest unbroken logs of observation the world has ever kept. And buried in all that data, they found a pattern that eclipses of the moon return in a cycle of about 18 years. For the first time, a people could look at a clay tablet and say, before it happened, when the moon would go dark. The terror of the sky was quietly becoming an appointment. But not everyone who looked up at that tower saw a wonder. Among the peoples that Babylon drew in were thousands of Judeans, carried off from Jerusalem after its temple was destroyed in 587 BC. They looked at the same tower from the canal banks and saw not a staircase to heaven, but the very height of human pride. And they left one of the haunting lines the ancient world ever wrote: "By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept." To one people, the tower was where God and man could meet. To another, it was the monument to arrogance that God would one day scatter into Babel. The same bricks, two different cities, and all of them lived for a single day in the year.
To stand in the processional way on the first morning of spring was to be swallowed by a canyon of blue.
The lions glared down from the walls on either side. The air was cold and thick with the smoke of burning cedar and the sourness of festival beer, and it was almost impossible to move for the press of the crowd. This was the Akitu, the New Year festival, 12 days that the whole city stopped to keep. It was not a pageant. To the Babylonians, it was a battle, fought every year, on which the survival of the world itself depended. During the festival, the priests recited the great poem of creation, the story of how Marduk had killed the monster of chaos and built the ordered world out of her body. If the rituals were performed and the god was satisfied, the river would rise, the barley would come, and the world would hold together for one more year. If they were botched, chaos would come back. The stakes were everything there is. At the heart of it stood the king, and what the festival demanded of him is astonishing for an absolute monarch. A temple text, written down in later centuries, so we cannot be sure the rite ran unchanged in Nebuchadnezzar's own day, describes a remarkable moment. The high priest stripping the king of his crown and scepter, making him kneel, and drawing from him a confession that he had not sinned against the city, had not neglected the gods, had not wronged his people. Only then was the crown handed back. Whatever its exact form, the idea behind it was unmistakably Babylonian. Once a year, the most powerful man in the world had to kneel in a bare room and prove that he was still fit to rule. Then came the moment that made him king in truth. The great doors of the Asagila, the temple at the foot of the tower, were thrown open, and the statue of Marduk was brought out into the morning. The king stepped forward and took the hand of the god, took Bel by the hand, the Babylonians said, and led him out into the light. Without that gesture, in that street, on that day, there was no lawful king in Babylon. And the god came out into a city built to receive him. The whole blue avenue, the gate of dragons, the lions along the walls, all of it existed for this one procession, the day the gods of Babylon walked their own road out through the Ishtar Gate toward the New Year house beyond the city. The statues themselves, robed in gold, did not go on foot. They were borne out in state, and the texts say they finished the journey to the festival house by river barge. The crowd moved with them like a tide. Now lift your eyes from the crowd to the tower standing over it, and climb. You leave the noise behind you on the first stage. By the third, the people in the avenue have gone small, and the blue gate is only a bright seam in the brick below. The staircase turns, the wind comes up, the air grows thin and clean. You pass the resting places cut into the steps for the long ascent, and at the last you reach the summit shrine, faced in glazed brick the color of the sky it was built to touch. Inside, there is no idol. There is only the couch and the table of gold
and the silence. This is the highest place anyone here has ever stood, and it is empty, kept ready every single night for a guest who is always expected and never seen. For 12 days each spring, Babylon was no longer a city with a tower at its center. It became the staircase itself, packed with people climbing toward heaven. For 12 days, the god lived among them. But gods do not stay.
The strange thing about Babylon is that the end, when it finally came, was not a fire or a flood.
The city changed hands without ever losing its tower. In 539 BC, its last king, Nabonidus, a man who had spent years away in a desert oasis devoted to a different god, who had let the great New Year festival lapse, lost the city to Cyrus of Persia. How he lost it depends on whom you believe. The Persian account, carved onto a clay cylinder, says that Babylon opened its gates and fell without a battle, welcoming Cyrus as a liberator, though that, of course, is the story the conqueror chose to tell. The Greeks said the Persians drew off the Euphrates and crept in along the dry riverbed in the dark. Either way, when it was over, the tower still stood. Cyrus walked to the Esagila and took the hand of Marduk, exactly as the kings of Babylon had always done, and the festivals carried on. 2 centuries later came the last and greatest conqueror of all. In 331 BC, Alexander the Great took Babylon, and he was so struck by the place that he chose it to be the capital of his world empire. He found Etemenanki old and crumbling, and he gave the order to rebuild it, taller and finer than before. First, the ruin had to be cleared away. The geographer Strabo wrote that the rubble alone would take 10,000 men 2 months to carry off. The work began, and then in 323 BC, in a palace in that same city, Alexander died, 32 years old, before a single new brick had been laid. No one ever finished it. The workers drifted away, and the staircase to heaven, the building that gave its name to a story we still tell our children, did not end as a smoking ruin or as a monument that travelers could one day come and admire. It ended as an enormous square pit of broken brick, 90 meters along each side, its foundations torn open to the sky, in the dead center of the ancient world. A bed of gold had once waited at the top of it for a god to lie down. Now there was no top. There was only the foundation, and the slow river beginning to wander from its course, and the empty square where heaven was meant to begin.
The Tower of Babel crowned its massive height with an empty golden bed, waiting for a god who never stayed.
Meanwhile, the Temple of Artemis in Ephesus was filled to the brim with real gold, acting as the safest bank in the Mediterranean because no thief dared to rob a goddess. Watch my deep dive on Ephesus next to explore a metropolis where faith and money were exactly the same thing.
Subscribe to help this channel grow, and let's keep reconstructing history. See you on the next journey.
Before we finish, I want to take a moment to recognize the people appearing on screen right now. To the members of this channel, thank you so much. Your ongoing support is what motivates me and helps keep this project alive. If you enjoy what we do here and would like to directly support the channel, I invite you to click the Join button down below. To our members and to everyone who is simply watching this video, thank you for your time.